To have two librarians, two librarians. I'm not sure we've ever really done that, not with two anyway, to talk about Santa Claus, which we thought was just such a really fun topic. And I'm just going to tell you a little tiny bit about these two women in front of you. Stephanie McAvoy is here with her hand raised. Now, you may have seen Stephanie because Stephanie is a substitute during the weekends here at this library, and so you may have seen her. She is a full-time librarian, however, at the West Hampton Beach Library, and she is head of patron services. She's been there for 4 years, and has lived on the eastern end of Long Island for many years. And so we're really delighted to have her here. Please welcome Stephanie McAvoy. Next to Stephanie is Nola Thacker, whom I've known for quite a few years now. She's actually been head of the programs at the West Hampton Library for 16 years. And if we get all kinds of library newsletters, we look through all of them. I always zero in on West Hampton because they have really good programs there. And smart programs, and you probably could go to their programs.
Yes.
Take a look at their newsletter. You could just Google them and see what they do. They do a lot of lunchtime programs, evening programs. They do lots of cool stuff there at West Hampton. She also works in the reference department, which you may be able to guess when she starts speaking, but she is from the South, as in Alabama. And I think the first way that I got to know about Nola was that I was given a book to read that was such a great book, The Complete Petrosexual. This book is a brilliant book. Isn't that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there it is. Is it in this library? That's a good question.
Yes.
Well, I would rush right over and check this book out because it's brilliant and funny and terrific. She's also written other books. She's ghostwritten books. She's written horror books for YA and adults, or is it ghostwritten or written? Young adults, which she attributes her interest in Santa Claus to this horror genre. So anyway, we have Nola Thacker here. Please welcome Nola Thacker. All right, so we'll start with Stephanie.
Hi. So we're going to talk about the history of Santa Claus. So in the minds of children, when they think of Santa Claus, they think of the North Pole, they think of reindeer, they think of sacks of toys. The images are vast that come into their minds. Mostly, he looks like this. But if you were a parent, you'd have to ask yourself, is this a symbol of selfless giving, or maybe a symbol of greed, or maybe a poster child for obesity, or he's always struggled to fit down the chimney. So, yeah, there was that. So when I embarked on the research for this presentation, I was amazed at how much scholarship there was about the history of Santa Claus. So there was so much. I just chose to construct a general timeline with some of the best known, although they weren't known to me, all of them, when I compiled this information, and most written about traditions relating to Santa Claus and the evolution of St. Nicholas to Santa Claus. So St. Nicholas was born around 270 AD in a town called Patara in Asia Minor. I got a little arrow there to show you where exactly that is. And that's modern-day Turkey. So an older set of parents were anxiously awaiting for decades the arrival of a child. And eventually, they were blessed with the birth of a son. They named him Nicholas, which in Greek translates to the hero of the people. The family wasn't rich, but they had enough to support themselves and give to charity. So I guess you could translate that as he had a comfortable childhood. And at age 12, his parents fell ill and died of the plague. So he was an orphan, and he donated much of his inheritance to charity and devoted himself to religious studies. So by the age of 19, he was ordained a priest in the Christian church. Still very young, he got the nickname of the boy bishop. So he was the Bishop of Myra. He earned his reputation for kindness and wisdom. His good works inspired flocks of people to the Christian church. In 303, the Roman Emperor Diocletian commanded all citizens of the empire, including all of Asia Minor, to worship him as God or suffer imprisonment and torture. So the Christians of Myra, led by the boy bishop, resisted. Thousands of Christians were imprisoned, including Nicholas as the Bishop of Myra. He was confined to a small cell for 5 years, where he suffered hunger, thirst, and cold, but he remained firm in his beliefs and held on for 5 years. Diocletian resigned, and Emperor Constantine took over, and in 313, all the Christians that were jailed were released. So in that, Nicholas returned to his post as the Bishop of Myra, and in that position worked the rest of his life to build up the church and convert people to Christianity. He died December 6th in the year 343, and a shrine was built in Myra to house his remains. Story of his works and great generosity spread. By 450 AD, hundreds of churches in Asia Minor and Greece were named in his honor. St. Nicholas was recognized as a saint around 800 AD, long before the Roman Catholic Church had established a canonization procedure, which happened around the 10th century, well, late in the 10th century. And at that time, local bishops canonized saints. So there are no official records of his posthumous miracles, although the legends that I'll discuss could be considered miracles. So he became the saint of sailors, the patron saint of sailors, because as legend has it, he saved a ship that ran aground on sharp rocks in a storm off the coast of Asia Minor. Sure of death, the sailors prayed to Bishop Nicholas, and he flew through the clouds, quieted the storms, and helped unstuck the ship. When the ship returned to shore, the captain and his crew made a pilgrimage to his church to ask how he was able to save them, how he knew they were in distress. And he told them that from an early age he could see in his mind people who were in danger and go to their aid. Sounds a little bit like Superman to me, but apparently he had this superpower. So he took no personal credit, calling on God as the motivation for how he was able to save them, and urged the sailors to devote their lives to God, and they promised they would. So sailors, from that point forward, patronized St. Nicholas. He also became the patron saint of marriageable maidens. And as that legend goes, the story was told that a once wealthy merchant in Myra, with 3 daughters of marriageable age, but no money for dowries, was forced at a certain point to consider selling his first daughter into slavery. Knowing the merchant was too proud to accept any help, Bishop Nicholas filled a bag with gold and tossed it through the window of their home. Considering a gift from God, the merchant was able to provide a dowry and arrange a good marriage for his first daughter. Sure, he would never be that desperate again. He found himself in that unfortunate circumstance a second time for his second daughter. Nicholas learned of his plight and tossed another bag of gold through the window. Again, the merchant was able to arrange a good marriage for the second daughter and moved on. And in dire straits again for the third daughter, he believed God would provide the gift. He just expected it to come through the window this time. So he waited. And he wanted to try to catch the delivery of this bag of gold. So when he came through the window, he ran outside and he saw Bishop Nicholas. And he thanked him profusely. Nicholas, as humble as he was, made him promise to never tell anyone that he was the benefactor of the gold. So only on his deathbed did the man reveal that it was the bishop who had saved his family. So that legend spread to Sweden and other northern European countries where gift givers dressed as St. Nicholas would throw gifts through open windows and run away. So it was all about doing something good and not being noticed. So other versions have the three daughters hanging stockings to dry before bed, and the bags of gold would toss through a smoke hole and land in their stockings, hence the tradition of hanging stockings for filling with small items. He also became known as the patron saint of small children, and that story goes as a small child was kidnapped by Arab pirates on the shore near Myra on December 6th of an undisclosed year, which was dedicated as the Day of St. Nicholas. The child was missing for a year, and on that anniversary of the 1 year of the abduction, the father, trying to console the mother, convinced her to go to church to pray to St. Nicholas as it was the day of observance of St. Nicholas Day. And she didn't want to go. And he convinced her to go and pay her respects and honor the saint. And that night, the child reappeared on their doorstep and claimed that St. Nicholas had come down, picked him up from his captors, told him not to be afraid, that his parents had prayed that morning for his return, and he was bringing him home. So, a basilica was built in Bari, Italy, after the conquest of Turkey by the Muslim Turks in 1071. A band of merchant seamen from Italy feared that St. Nicholas's remains might be captured by Muslim raiders, so they brought them back to Italy. And they built this beautiful basilica. In 1087, his remains were stolen back and brought back to Bari by a group of sailors, whereafter the remains were reinterred in a new basilica built in his honor, and thousands of pilgrims visited each year. During this time in Italy, Nicholas became a more popular name than Peter or Paul. Ships from all over Europe stopped in the port of Bari and learned of Nicholas and his great deeds. Word traveled to France, Germany, Holland, England, Sweden, and beyond, honoring his memory and great deeds. Hundreds of blind, deaf, and crippled people made pilgrimages to his tomb in hope of a miracle. When Italian sailors passed through the port of Myra and saw the lines at the tomb, they traveled far and wide telling stories of the amazing miracles that St. Nicholas was performing. And the tall, thin Bishop of Myra began to evolve into the gift giver he became known as. Historically, through Europe, belief and traditions varied. Spanish children believed gifts were brought by three wise men on January 5th, which is the eve of the Epiphany. That was the day that the three wise men visited the baby Jesus and brought the gifts. So Italian children were told that gifts were delivered by Befana, an old Palestinian woman who was too busy with housework to travel with the three wise men. And then the next day, she regretted her decision to not travel with them. So, according to the legend, she traveled the world on Epiphany Eve, searching for the Christ child and leaving candy and small gifts in the shoes of sleeping children. Russian children were told a different version. Babushka, a witch-like woman, gave the three wise men the wrong directions when they were looking for baby Jesus. So she was condemned to wander the earth on Epiphany Eve and enter the homes of children and place gifts under their pillows, hoping one of them was the Christ child and that she would be forgiven for her misdeeds. And some of this sounds scary that they would actually tell this to children. In Sweden, the gift giver was Jolt. Pardon me if there's any Swedes here that I might be saying this wrong, but it's Jolten, an elf with a red cape and a long white beard. He rode in a sleigh pulled by a julbak, which is a Christmas goat, which you can see. Swedish children put out a bowl of porridge for the elf and hay and carrots for the goat before going to bed. That is their tradition. In Holland, Germany, and France, the legend of St. Nicholas and the Three Poor Maidens was adapted into a play and was performed in churches on St. Nicholas's name day, and it was an instant success. It was done for centuries. In Holland, more than 23 churches were named for St. Nicholas by the end of 1100. In honor of the saint's good deeds, worshippers in these churches created a new holiday custom. On St. Nicholas Eve, which was December 5th, they filled 3 wooden shoes with coins that they had collected for the poor and placed the shoes at the door of the church, symbolizing the 3 bags of gold that St. Nicholas threw through the window to save the marital lien. And the custom spread to other churches, and Dutch children would leave their empty wooden shoes by the fire on December 5th and on St. Nicholas Eve in hope that the kind saint would fill them with candy and small gifts. As St. Nicholas's popularity grew, new stories emerged in Europe. This is my personal favorite. One of the most famous was told in France around the year 1150. 3 boys traveling to enroll in a religious boarding school stopped at an inn for the night. Seeing their fine clothes and purses full of money, the innkeeper decided that they would not leave alive. He was going to rob them. So his wife drugged their food, and while they slept, he slit their throats. He slit their throats, he cut them up, and he stuffed them inside a pickle barrel, of all things. The next day, St. Nicholas, of course knowing of what they did, knocked on the door dressed as a beggar, looking for food, and was denied. So he was quick to tell the innkeeper and his wife that he knew what they had done, and he begged for forgiveness. Nicholas invited the innkeeper and his wife to pray with him that God would bring the boys back to life, and if he did, they would be forgiven, and if he didn't, they would be condemned. So they prayed with Nicholas, and the boys rose out of the barrels looking exactly as they had when they arrived at the inn. Although this picture depicts them naked, I'm not sure why the artist who drew this picture, honoring this legend, didn't put their clothes back on if they actually were as they had arrived. So like the story of the 3 maidens, this too was made into a play and performed in churches and schools all over Europe. The play became a highlight of St. Nicholas Day celebrations and helped to establish Nicholas as the patron saint of students and children. In the 1200s, French schoolboys honored Nicholas by celebrating Bishop Nicholas Day on December 6th, which was declared a school holiday. A boy from one of the religious schools was chosen to be the bishop for the day. He wore a red robe and a tall hat, and there were festivities, there were parades to praise St. Nicholas through the streets of the towns, and often there was a performance of the 3 students in the pickle barrel play. The boy bishop and his followers, he got a little entourage, and they knocked on doors looking for donations for the church, and they were able to split some of the donations for the church, candles for the church, and candy for the boys. By the 1400s, this tradition spread to Germany, England, Belgium, Holland, and Switzerland. Unfortunately, over the years, it turned into a public display of violence and disorder, and was eventually outlawed in all these countries in Europe. In the end of the 1400s, St. Nicholas was the 3rd most beloved religious figure behind Jesus and Mary, and historians estimate 2,000 chapels, hospitals, and monasteries were named in his honor. By the mid-1500s, German religious leader Martin Luther led a movement to reform the Roman Catholic Church. One of his main concerns was the worship of saints, which he felt was based largely on superstition. So St. Nicholas Day came under heavy fire, and it was denounced as false and childish. So this movement established the Protestant church across Europe. Eventually, in most Protestant countries, gift-giving celebrations moved from St. Nicholas Day to Christmas. Several new gift givers were invented to replace St. Nicholas in the imaginations of children. In the 1600s, many European children grew up never learning about St. Nicholas. When the English stopped worshiping St. Nicholas in the 1500s, they took on Father Christmas, who looked much like this. He was portrayed as a gigantic man in a red or green fur-trimmed robe, often with a hood, a crown of holly, ivy, or mistletoe on his head. England chose Father Christmas to be a non-religious figure. The Germans were sent in the opposite direction. German children were told that the Christ child himself, Christkindl, was the one who delivered their gifts. German children put out bread baskets and plates for the Christkindl to fill with nuts, cookies, and candies. The Holy Child was believed to travel on the back of a white donkey, so they also left out straw for the donkey. The presents were called Christ bundles, and aside from food, the bundles contained hats, scarves, mittens, dolls, and other small toys. Sometimes a birch rod or Christ rod was included if the child had been not so good. They were like on the naughty list to remind them that they should. The only Protestant country that continued to worship St. Nicholas was Holland, in part because the Dutch were seafarers who still looked to Nick as their patron saint. According to Dutch tradition, St. Nicholas returned to earth each St. Nicholas Eve wearing a red bishop robe on a horse. Behind him, on foot, came a frightening creature known as Black Pete. He had a sooty face, horns on his head, scary red eyes, and a long red tongue. Dutch children were told that Black Pete was the devil, who St. Nicholas defeated and made him his servant. On his back, St. Black Pete carried a sack of or trunk or full of gifts for children who had been good, and birch rods for those who were bad. It was said that St. Nicholas sent Black Pete down the chimney to deliver the gifts and birch rods in and around the shoes that were left on the hearth. In 1624, the Dutch East Indies Company established a colony of New Netherlands with New Amsterdam as its capital. The first Dutch settlers brought the most treasured traditions, including the celebration of St. Nicholas Day. It became a tradition that on December 5th, a Dutch ship arrived with toys, candies, and books from the mother country. It became known as the St. Nicholas ship, and the children believed that the saint himself sent the ship full of goodies. At St. Nicholas parties in New Amsterdam, children laid out a white sheet on the floor and awaited the arrival of a tall, thin man dressed as St. Nicholas. The children sang songs of welcome when he arrived, with Black Pete in tow. The saint scattered candies on the sheet and distributed small gifts. Meanwhile, St. Black Pete walked around the room growling and shaking the birch sticks and carrying a burlap sack which held treats for the good children and threatening the bad boys and girls that they would be taken away. Before that happened, St. Nicholas would command that he and Black Pete make a swift exit, and then the families and the children would continue their celebration with songs and dance and other merriment. The Puritan Revolution in England took place in the mid-1640s, and they made concerted effort to abolish Christmas and outlaw all of its traditional customs. In June of 1637, Parliament passed an ordinance for abolishing our festivals, which formally abolished Christmas in its entirety in England, along with other traditional church festivals. And following the Restoration in 1660, those festivities resumed. Life changed drastically when the British seized New Amsterdam in 1664 and renamed it New York. The new British residents celebrated Christmas instead of St. Nicholas Day and told their children that Father Christmas, not St. Nicholas, delivered the gifts on Christmas Eve. Descendants of Dutch settlers preserved many traditions, and Dutch children continued to believe in St. Nicholas, or Sinterklaas, as they called him. As years passed, British and Dutch colonists intermarried, and Sinterklaas and Father Christmas blended into a single gift giver. By the end of the American Revolution in 1783, he had acquired a new American name, Santa Claus, and looked much like this. Post-Revolutionary War communities established by Episcopalians, Lutherans, Roman Catholics, and members of the Dutch Reformed Church observed religious services and feasts on December 25th. Quakers, Baptists, Congregationalists, Presbyterian, and Puritans did not. This group often denounced Christmas altogether as sinful. A little sidebar about Black Pete. He never became part of the American Christmas customs, thankfully, but he continued to play a role in St. Nicholas Day festivities in the Netherlands. I don't know if he still does, but I think he was a little traumatic. for children. But at this point, Nola's going to take over with some interesting information about after this point where he became Santa Claus to America.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay, so this is a brief modern Santa Christmas timeline up there. You see, Puritans nicked St. Nicholas, which was, thank you, Charles Cromwell, but Captain John Smith enjoyed eggnog and Christmas cheer in Jamestown in 1607. He wasn't deterred. In 1660, Christmas was reinstated, as Stephanie told you. But in Boston, there continued to be a 5-shilling fine for celebrating Christmas until 1681, which again, Boston. 17th century, the Dutch immigrants bring Santa Claus to the New World. And then in 1804, the New York Historical Society was founded, and St. Nicholas became a patron saint again, this time of the New York Historical Society. And to celebrate that, the members enacted the Dutch practice of gift giving at Christmas. In 1809, Washington Irving wrote A History of New York, where St. Nicholas appeared, and made his first foray into the literature that presents the modern St. Nicholas. And Irving was the one who gave St. Nicholas a wagon to ride above the trees. So he and even though the original, I think, St. Nicholas could fly through the air to save people, this St. Nicholas now could fly through the air to deliver gifts and take a wagon with him. It doesn't say what was pulling the wagon. I think he was just driving it, sort of like a modern car. So, then in a poem about Santa Claus appeared. He was dressed in fur and drove a single reindeer sled, and this was printed and printed by William Gilly. Then in 1822, you might be familiar with this, there was an account of a visit from St. Nicholas, aka the night before Christmas. A few of you might have heard of this one. In 1828, the New York City Council created the first police force, thank you Christmas, because there was a Christmas riot. And then in 1841, a man in a Philadelphia department store dressed in a Kris Kringle outfit and climbed out of the chimney into the store. So there's a little of the commercialization already. Although, to be fair, there had been commercialization of Christmas well before this in other ways, although not in the ways we're familiar with in modern times. And then you'll be familiar with Thomas Nast. He created Santa for the Christmas issue of Harper's Magazine, which continued through the 1890s. He created the drawing. The first drawing was not on the cover of the magazine, but was inside, and it was of Union soldiers, and it was at Lincoln's request. So Santa was being used to support the morale of the troops and also as psychological warfare. Not the first time. You'll also see later on in his comic book iterations, Santa played that role. Christmas becomes a national holiday in 1870. In 1897, Yes, Virginia, There is a Santa Claus by Francis P. Church was published in the New York Sun. 1931, Coca-Cola begins its trademark illustrations of Santa and his bottle. And I don't know why I said his bottle. That should be, his Coca-Cola bottle, of course. I'm thinking about something else to do with noses. But anyway, so what is interesting about this is there was an urban myth that Coca-Cola had created the Santa that we have today and used it for commercial reasons. But am I standing too close to this? This feels very feedbacky. Okay. Is that better? Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was another company before that who used Santa to advertise their beverages, their ginger ale. For ginger ale and other beverages, and that was well before Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola does not own Santa Claus and does not own the idea of using Santa Claus for advertising. A sidebar, Santa was moved to the North Pole at about the time Arctic exploration, that was added in at about the time Arctic exploration began. So his house was set up there. That was The Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was written as an advertisement for the Montgomery Ward store. That was its first appearance. And Rudolph himself may be male, but as someone has pointed out, it's in all likelihood the reindeer are all female, because male reindeer shed their antlers and would be antler-free. So the likelihood is that the women are pulling the sleigh. Just saying. So. Then in 1937, right before Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer came out, a department store Santa, Charles Howard, established a Santa Claus school that is still, I believe, still in existence, if I'm not mistaken. Stephanie's going to talk more about Santa training schools. And as a sidebar to that, we had a Santa at West Hampton for a while who was very proud of being a real beard Santa, because apparently there's a schism in those who portray Santa. The real beard Santas are very, very proud of being real beard Santas and look down on the Santas who do not have real beards. So, also, one of the people who weighed in on some of the early traditions creating Santa was Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz. He wrote a book called The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. Letter writing also began at around that time. And, sorry, I have a terrible time reading my handwriting. The letter writing began in North America. It's practiced all over the world, but it's particularly interesting because in the United States, letter writing is answered. The Postal Service has people who answer the letters and also try to hook the letters up with people who can give kids who want or need things for Christmas. Put them together so they can get some of their Christmas wishes granted. For those of you who want to know, the U.S. Postal Code for writing your letter to Santa is 99705. If you're in Canada, the postal code is H, lower letter O, capital letter H, space, lower letter O, capital H, lower O, or ho, ho, ho. And Santa has spread around the world. I found it interesting. Very early on, I think it was in 1914, Santa had spread as far as Japan. They found an unattributed illustration of Santa in Japan. And Christmas is celebrated in Japan, but very much as a sort of holiday like Valentine's Day. So it's nice to give a gift to someone you love, but things are not closed. You could maybe go out for a nice dinner. And one of the traditional gifts is the Christmas cake, which is given on December 25th, and then on December 26th it has no value anymore. And that's one of the sort of derogatory things people say about, although that's less and less now in Japan, people say that a woman who is not married is like a Christmas cake on December 26th, that no one wants her. But I understand the women are fighting back against that, so perhaps there are a few male Christmas cakes too. Just a quick back look. This is the Feast of Saturnalia, which was celebrated on December 17th, is considered the forerunner of Christmas as we know it today. The Romans gave each other gifts, and Saturn was the god of wealth, well-being, and agriculture. And much of the spirit of Saturnalia, the feasting, the partying, the gift-giving, and also in the practices of Saturnalia was the switching of classes. So I'm sorry, I keep saying, I'm driving myself crazy. The masters would serve the servants rather than the other way around. And that tradition has, of course, largely stopped, except in the British, I believe in the British Navy or British Army, they still do that. That's one of the practices at Christmas. To take a look at Christmas at Santa Claus now, you have to look at this particular book, which was the influence for Charles Dickens. This is why we're looking at this book first. This influenced a very, very famous book, which you're probably familiar, A Christmas Carol. You're not so familiar with this one, perhaps, The Celebration of Christmas at Bracebridge Hall. But some of the things listed in the book, and it's by Washington Irving, are some of the things that are familiar as part of Christmas. Playing games, there's a Yule log, a Christmas candle, mistletoe, snapdragon, which I believe is a drink, if I'm not mistaken. And This was based on a true account of a visit to Ashton Hall near Birmingham, England, and that Irving very much enjoyed and immortalized in his book. This is a preliminary drawing for Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, illustrated by John Leach. The illustration I had on the left got dropped out. I couldn't get it to come back up, but the original illustration showed, this is the Ghost of Christmas Present, and it showed the Ghost of Christmas Present dressed in red, because Leach didn't read the book, as illustrators sometimes don't do, and he didn't listen, and Dickens said, no, he's green, read the book, and it's kind of interesting. Let's see if I can find the description. Okay, so this is from A Christmas Carol, Stave 3. The second of the three spirits is known as the Ghost of Christmas Present. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect robe, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, minced pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the Ghost of Christmas Present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free, as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. So you can see the outline of the current Santa in this description, although in the green robe, and this was the Ghost of Christmas Present. Dickens wrote this book, or actually it's a novella, in 6 weeks. He was suffering from writer's block. He was suffering from writer's block. He was suffering from financial difficulties. His wife was pregnant, and he was worried. He was also had been caught up and was very concerned with the state of children, or orphan and abandoned poor children in the street, and there were few resources to take care of them. And he had visited one of the schools that looked after the children and wanted to make a difference, wanted to make people see that this should be addressed. But he originally started to write a pamphlet describing the ills that the children were experiencing. Instead, set that aside and wrote this novella, which has never been out of print since. I believe it's been 178 years, if I'm not mistaken. And that changed Christmas. It also changed the way people thought about giving. It really did have an effect, far more than a tract saying, you're being bad, be good. Scrooge embodied all the things that, and was based on real characters, although they're not exactly sure. They have several ideas about businessmen of the time that might have contributed to it. But this was a huge undertaking, and he wrote in a kind of frenzy. And when it was published, it sold out by Christmas Eve and was reprinted, and has been reprinted ever since. So he did achieve his goal. He also changed the face of Christmas. He was the forerunner. Christmas was, to some extent, had been practiced in England, but this cemented some of the customs the feasting, the food, the family, the gathering together, the taking the day off for Christmas. All of this was embodied in A Christmas Carol. Interestingly enough, what was not embodied in The Christmas Carol was caroling, which was just coming back in the front to the forefront. Christmas trees, which the ruler Victoria, was it Victoria ruler? They just brought Christmas trees from Germany, and that's nowhere to be seen in this. So some of the things that are part of our Christmas now were not yet part of his Christmas. So those became blended together, but he really did bring Christmas to the forefront. And I just put this up here, a visit from St. Nicholas down the chimney. And this is Arthur Rackham's illustration to the left. You may be familiar with Arthur Rackham as an illustrator, also from Alice in Wonderland. He did those wonderful illustrations and some of the others. But you can see the description of Santa. He has a bundle of toys. He comes down the chimney. There's stockings in this illustration. He has a mouth like a bow, but he's very small. And it doesn't say that he was dressed in red. It says he was dressed in fur. And he was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf. So this is one of the iterations of Santa, produced by A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is such a wonderful poem, so much fun. But that does not come without its scandal as well. Clement Moore claimed authorship of this. It was published anonymously in the Troy Sentinel in 1823. Moore claimed the authorship, but not until 1836. And he included it in an anthology of his poems in 1844. However, Livingston's family claimed their father recited the poem to them 15 years before publication. Livingston was distantly related to Moore, so he wouldn't have been aware of it, possibly. Someone did a separate sort of forensic analysis of the author's works and say that it points to Livingston. And here's a side-by-side sort of comparison of some of the arguments for and against. Clement Clark Moore was, sort of a cranky person. He didn't particularly like children. He never wrote, almost never used that meter. He never used all as an adverb in his work, which is used in this. He wrote a letter to inquire if there was an author to the poem before claiming it, which seems rather suspect to me. He'd also been involved in a prior plagiarism case, and he used German names of the reindeer, Donner, and Blitzen. To the right, you'll see that Henry has sort of a better claim to it, at least in terms of personality and verse writing. So no one will ever know, although literary detective and master professor Don Foster worked on this, and he compared more to the Grinch, so you can see where his leanings were. So, skipping ahead from Grinches and plagiarists, I'm coming to something, and you'll have to bear with me because there are about 4 slides of comic book covers with Santa, because I just find this fascinating. Santa, a joy of the comic book world, and someone wrote, this is hysterical. This is sort of one of the things that made me more interested in this, most interested in this, horror books aside. Someone who was writing about this said, "Nothing says holiday spirit like punching Santa in the face. What better way to bring in the good cheer than by watching a brawl with Kris Kringle and his 8 tiny reindeer?" So, the superheroes, and the superhero genres, particularly the Marvel Universe, embraced the 2 main comic book houses are Marvel and DC Comics. For those of you who don't know, Marvel is the Avengers, DC is Batman and Superman. Does that help? If you have any other questions, I'll be glad to talk at length about it later. But anyway, you'll see some of the early comic books, and you'll see that it was the superheroes helping Superman, helping Santa deliver his gifts. And you see down there in the center, Santa's in bed with a cold, and they're doing all the toy making, and they're obviously going to deliver the toys. Captain Marvel and Mary Marvel are helping Santa because I guess the sleigh's out of commission there on the left. Superman is helping Santa fit into the chimney there, which is an interesting sidebar. Marvel gave Santa a number of characteristics that may or may not have had an effect on how we view Santa today. In the Marvel Universe, Santa is able to shrink and grow at will, so he can fit down the chimney without being ignominiously stuffed down it by Superman. He has eternal life. He's able to influence people to good and or evil, but of course Santa would never influence anyone to evil, except, of course he would. Now you see Santa has other lives. He was Santa as detective there on the left. That's Santa. Santa is the greatest detective. Why? Because he knows when you've been naughty or you've been nice. He can tell. So She-Hulk hires him to help her out solve a mystery. I'm sorry to report that in the course of the mystery, he engages in making a pass at She-Hulk, and his wife finds out, so it does not exactly end well for Santa, but it does eventually, all's well that ends well. So there's that, and then Santa finds out that his reindeer in that top center panel, his reindeer are actually Skrulls, which are these evil alien beings. So Skrulls, he has to defeat the Skrulls and deliver all the presents on Christmas Eve. He does this by borrowing the Infinity Glove, and again, if you're not a comic book person, the Infinity Glove has enormous power, but like all power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what happens? Santa gets corrupted by the Infinity Glove. So all of the Marvel Universe people have to fight to get the glove off of him and make him convert back to being good Santa again. And then there's another one where in the bottom, someone dressed up as Santa is stealing and wreaking havoc and causing trouble in Spider-Man's universe. He actually defeats Spider-Man, poor Spider-Man, and he's running up to the roof to get away, and who should he encounter but the actual Santa Claus himself, who sets everything back to right. You can see him. Last year it was slasher films, now it's this. I'm not laughing, says Santa. And then finally, here's Santron, and that's Ultron, if you remember the Age of Ultron again. Santa is made evil because he becomes Santatron and wreaks some havoc in the world before they're able to put it back to rights. So, and then there are aliens. Santa, the Galaxy Science Fiction series, you'll see there's Santa with alien reindeer up there with their little helmets on so that they can breathe. There's Santa at sort of a cantina that looks like the Star Wars cantina down there, enjoying libations and Christmas cheer. There's Santa being serenaded by carols, and it looks as if he's inside a spaceship there, and they've come knocking at the door. And then there's Santa taking the requests of both aliens and bipedal earthlings, which is kind of a nice, actually, image, I think. And then he becomes an alien anti-hero here. You see him with the Hulk. You see him with a gun and black glass, and the dark glasses, looking all tough. You see him battling one of the iterations of the Hulk, and you see him facing down Iron Man on the right there. And Iron Man doesn't look like he's doing too well in that. But finally, we circle back around, and you see a more recent holiday special with all of the superheroes in the sleigh and the presents and Santa on top. So Santa's had quite the ride through the comic book universe. And I kind of think I like what they did with it. They've really expanded his reach and his capacity and recognized his many, many qualities. And then very quickly, other pop culture iterations. Miracle on 34th Street, with which you're all familiar. This is the first version. As you see, it's a classic now. It was not an instant classic, although it got great reviews, but it did win Academy Awards for Best Actor, Supporting Role, Best Writing, Original Story, Best Writing Screenplay, and lost to Gentleman's Agreement for Best Picture. And it's now part of the Library of Congress and also part of the Academy Film Archive because it's so significant. And it's also shown every year at Christmas, as well as new versions, which I don't think I like as well. And then here's some other, the worst Santa movies ever. As you can see, they sort of took a page from the comic books, perhaps, although, again, I like the comic books better. But there's Santa with muscles, there's Bad Santa, there's Grumpy Cat, who can resist Grumpy Cat, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Ernest Saves Christmas, Santa and the Martians. And that's just a few. And here's some of the Ghost of Christmas Present, a Muppet, a Christmas Carol, Mickey's Christmas Carol, Mickey Mouse, and Scrooge with Kenneth Moore up there. And that's, again, there are, dozens of these. These are just a few of the parts of the Santa universe that we have come to expect today. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie, because she's going to talk about one of the more interesting aspects of modern day Santa.
So in Missouri, in 2016, which was, they haven't done it again yet, I expect because it's such a large undertaking, they did a Santa conference. And it was at a very large hotel on a lake. It was 5 days. And this is a picture of some of the attendants there in that big donut shape. Actually, I think it's supposed to be a star, but it looks a little bit more like a donut. There were about over 800 Santa and Mrs. Claus who attended this conference. There were 300 industry vendors selling Santa suits and makeup kits and beard care products, marketing and website services, and North Pole workshop sets, elf figures, and assorted other things. There were 42 workshop programs during the 5 days, some of which were a more comfortable hat for Santa, Santa makeup tutorial, Santa and special needs children, Santa ethics 101, business freelancing for Santa, finding and keeping Christmas clients, international Santa gigs, you know how to travel well, pro-level Santa career business moves, marketing your Santa services, Santa's schedule, organization, and planning, and they had Santa fashion show where you should know that a basic Santa suit costs about $600, so it's a little bit of an investment. And the majority of the attendants were people who were this was their second career. The average age was 62 and a half, and you considered it a collection of aging baby boomers who were looking to do something else with their retirement time. There were Navy pilots and high school teachers and Catholic priests, a variety of different previous employment. Mall Santas earn about $10,000 a season from Thanksgiving to Christmas, which is really relatively a month, so it's not a bad gig if you want to sit in that suit for a month. 10 to 12-hour days, and it's not easy. I'm not saying I would want to do it, but in the 70s was when the shift to having a real beard meant you were like a legit Santa versus, you behind your ears like a little something else. So they had specialty Santas also at the convention. They had the Lone Star Santa suit with a cowboy hat and the matching boots and spurs. There was a Civil War Santa with striped pants and a star jacket. Big Sky Santa with a long floor-length duster, and looked like he was coming across the plains with his cowboy hat. Probably one of the best known and most loved and hated events is SantaCon in New York City, which happened this past weekend, December 8th. That's a real picture on the right there from last weekend SantaCon. It was one of the more reasonable pictures because most everybody thinks of SantaCon as a drunken bar crawl, which it probably didn't start that way, but it's definitely what it's become. If you've ever been in New York City on a SantaCon day, you will understand the magnitude of just people dressed as Santa Claus, Mrs. Claus, scantily clad, fully clad, sober, drunk. The next day after SantaCon is even worse if you've been in New York City because the city is wrecked and there's just piles of puke everywhere and it's really gross. I've experienced both days, not at taking part in SantaCon, but having been in the city for other reasons. And it's kind of like the day after St. Patrick's Day. It's kind of like, just a reason for drunken festivities. And it's really, I think, taken a bad turn. It used to be like a more fun, jolly event, and now it's kind of evolved into a millennial version of just a drunken party with Santa. But it does take place every year, and people travel to it. I don't know, New York is like one of the big ones, and it did take place last week. I think I would update the pictures from the last time. And that is something that I hope you never go in the city on that day because it's very difficult to navigate the subways and buses and yes.
When did it start? I lived in the city for 30 years. Until
Oh,
late
actually,
90s.
that's a good
I have
question.
experience.
Oh, just said, yeah, it's the first weekend in December.
But when did it start?
I don't know that exactly. Yeah, yes.
It must be recent.
Yeah, maybe 10 years, yeah.
That's what I,
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking.
And it's quickly devolved into something that is a little bit crazy. You know, there's all kinds of stories of crazy things that use that. So that's the end of our presentation. Does anybody have
I
any
just
questions?
like to say something. I come from Czechoslovakia originally. And the tradition is very strong there. And actually it has a big religious background, but it was going on also through the communism. I grew up with communism. And they tolerated it. And it's very strong until this day. And usually in small towns or villages, one of the fathers dresses as a Santa Claus. He has a devil in him. There's another father dressed as a devil and an angel. And they go literally from door to door, knock on the doors, even in apartment buildings. And if the child was good, the child gets the toys from the Santa Claus. And if the child was misbehaving through the year, the devil gives him a bag of corn, real corn, and has chains. The devil always has the chains and rattles the chains.
A little bit like Black
And the children are really scared. They are really scared. That's the bad part. They are really scared. And through the whole year, the parents would say to the children, if you are bad, the devil comes. So, you know, it's kind of a hell in bringing up children as well. So, it's interesting.
Well, we went to East in Italy some years back. I guess maybe this is a St. Nicholas imposter. But the town was Tarantino. And one of the brothers had died in the church, so the church was open. And they opened the sacred wall downstairs where St. Nicholas's body was. And it's called St. Nicholas of Tarantino. And it was a gorgeous, well, he was mummified. And it was a silver casket. And the idea was that the original St. Nicholas came from Albania. So now, the
Yeah.
presented evidence.
I'm
That's
sure,
actually
because there were so few
wrong.
records during that time, many countries could have had their own slant on it, they had documented it differently once they started writing it down. It literally, I could have spoke here for 4 days on all the different things that I was able to find. I just had to kind of pick a path and stay with it, tell one story, because as you're saying, there's probably plenty of others out there. Any other questions?
My earliest recollection of Santa Claus was my father's friend, or cousin actually, a very animated gentleman. And I was about 6 years old when I made him come to Santa Claus. He scared the living daylights out of me. I actually got a temperature. That's how
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow, so yeah, then it could be kind of traumatic.
Yeah, I wonder if it's different today because there's so many Santa Clauses in every store and everything. I suppose it's hard to believe
Only
in.
the helpers.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The real Santa Claus
He's
is
at
at
the North Pole.
I want to thank you, I especially want to thank you before Mary Cummings leaves, because Mary Cummings, it represents the Southampton History Museum, and they are our co-sponsors, whom I forgot to acknowledge before this program. This was so much fun, and we put a lot of work into it, and it was awfully entertaining and enlightening, and thank you for doing it. Thank you.
Oh, and can I just add one other thing? If you have an original copy of A Christmas Carol, it's for $28.
Really?
Yeah.
Does anybody have more questions, or, anyway?
Thank you all for
All right,
coming.
thank you.
Have a good holiday.